In 1942, a 25-year-old woman stood in front of the American press corps in Washington, D.C. She wore a Soviet military uniform. Her face gave away nothing. A reporter asked, "Don't you think, Miss Pavlichenko, that the skirt you're wearing is a bit too long?" She had just killed 309 men. Her response never made it into most American newspapers. But what came next changed how the world saw women in combat and exposed something the Soviet Union desperately wanted buried. This isn't the story you've been told, the myth they sold you. For decades, Lyudmila Pavlichenko has been packaged as a symbol, a propaganda tool, the lady death who proved women could fight. But here's what nobody mentions. She wasn't the deadliest female sniper in history. That honor probably goes to Nina Lobkovskaya with 308 confirmed kills, Natalia Kovshova with 167, or others whose records stayed locked away until Soviet archives cracked open in 1991. Some names are still blacked out. She wasn't fighting for equality. She was fighting because the Soviet Union was hemorrhaging losses badly and needed every warm body who could hold a rifle. And her 309 kills? The real number could have been higher or lower. The Soviet confirmation system had. Let's call them complications we'll dig into. So why do we remember her name? When dozens of deadlier Soviet women snipers have vanished from memory, the answer pulls back the curtain on how wars get remembered. And who controls that memory? June 1941, the collapse. When Germany crashed across the border on June 22, 1941, the Red Army didn't just retreat. It fell apart. Within 3 weeks, the Wehrmacht had bagged 600,000 Soviet soldiers. Whole divisions just stopped existing. Equipment worth fortunes sat rusting in fields. Officers got bullets for cowardice. That was really just following impossible orders. In the first 18 days, the Red Army lost more aircraft than the Luftwaffe even owned. Not from dogfights, from running away on the ground. Pilots bolted so fast, they left planes gassed up and loaded on runways. German scouts photographed entire rows of pristine Soviet fighters, abandoned without firing a single round. The Soviet High Command stared down a nightmare no nation had faced before. How do you rebuild an army while it's burning down around you? The answer came fast and ugly. Throw in everything, everyone. Women had served behind the lines before, bandaging wounds, shuffling papers, manning radios. But suddenly, the math shifted. A woman who could shoot straight became worth more than a man who couldn't. Lyudmila Pavlichenko walked into a recruitment office in Odessa that summer. She was a university student, 24 years old, nose deep in history books. She'd put in years at a shooting club, not because she dreamed of war, but because the USSR pushed marksmanship as something every citizen owed the state. She figured they'd hand her a nurse's armband. She asked for a rifle instead. The recruiting officer looked skeptical. Female combatants were still rare in 1941. He tossed her a rifle and jerked his thumb toward a training range. "Prove it," he said. She fired and qualified. What happened next wasn't about inspiration. It was cold arithmetic. The 25th Rifle Division was bleeding personnel, staring down German advance units, and desperately short on anyone who could actually shoot. They gave her a Mosin Nagant, a scope, and marching orders. No ceremony, no speeches, no time. What they don't show in the movies. Here's where Hollywood gets snipers dead wrong. They don't prowl around alone. They don't pick targets on a whim. They don't stack up kills like some video game scoreboard. Soviet snipers in 1940, one got handed specific jobs. Shut down enemy machine gun nests. Drop officers and radio operators. Hunt German snipers. Watch enemy movements and report back. And here's the bit that never makes the final cut. Most of their time was spent doing absolutely nothing. A sniper could lie in the exact same spot for 12 hours, waiting for one high-value target, pissing where you lay, choking down cold rations, without moving your jaw enough to throw shadows, wrestling with sleep, while mosquitoes drained you. German counter-sniper tactics by 1940 got downright devious. Helmets propped on sticks. Dummies positioned near obvious kill zones. Soviet snipers who bit, got pinpointed by sound, and wiped out in seconds. That Pavlichenko made it through suggests she smelled these traps coming. Her training notes, dug up from archives in 2008, show sketches of German decoy setups, with a scribbled note. Waited 6 hours. Target never blinked. Pavlichenko's first kill happened during the defense of Odessa. She never spelled it out in any interview. That detail matters. Snipers who bullshit love talking about their first kill. The ones who actually did it usually don't. What we know, German infantrymen, about 400 meters out. One shot. Her spotter confirmed it. She threw up afterward, then crawled back to her position. The part history deleted. Here's something that stayed locked up until 1991. The Soviet Union fielded more than 2,000 female snipers during World War II. You could probably name 3. Why? Because when the war ended, Stalin's government went about systematically erasing their stories. Female veterans got warned against wearing their medals. Plenty were denied housing and pensions. Some got investigated for moral corruption. Code for the insinuation that women serving alongside men must have been selling themselves. The Soviet propaganda machine had paraded women soldiers during the war to shame the West and fire up Soviet men. But once the shooting stopped, they became an embarrassment. Snapped back almost overnight. So why does Pavlichenko's name survive? Because she was useful twice. First, as a propaganda symbol in 1942, when the Soviet Union was bleeding out and desperate for American help. Second, as a sanitized hero in the 1960s, when the USSR wanted to wave around historical gender equality without acknowledging how they tossed female veterans aside after 1945. She survived in memory because she could be controlled. The others weren't so lucky. Sevastopol, where snipers went to die. By late 1941, Pavlichenko got shipped to Sevastopol, a fortress city on the Black Sea that would suffer through one of the longest sieges. In modern warfare, the siege dragged on for 250 days. Put that in perspective. Sevastopol held out longer than France did. The Soviet garrison was outnumbered 5-1, getting hammered by siege artillery that included 800mm railway guns, the biggest weapons ever rolled into combat. These monsters launched 7-ton shells that punched craters 30 feet deep. Snipers worked their trade, while the earth itself convulsed from bombardments. You could feel 20 miles out. For a sniper, Sevastopol was heaven and hell. Heaven because the terrain was rocky, sight lines were clean, and engagement distances stretched long. Hell because the Germans knew all that too. What grew out of the chaos was a hidden war. Inside the bigger battle, Soviet and German snipers stalked each other with cold, methodical patience. Both sides studied techniques, logged deaths, picked apart patterns. This was where Pavlichenko's reputation really took root, not because she was reckless, but because she refused to be. German snipers in 1941 ranked among the best on Earth. They had training, combat time, and gear that Soviet snipers couldn't match at first. Plenty of Soviet snipers didn't survive their first week. At Sevastopol, Pavlichenko made it through on something no training manual can teach: patience. She'd burn days watching a single German position, clocking when patrols rotated, when smoke breaks happened, where shadows crept at different hours. Then she'd wait for the slip-up, a helmet showing for 3 seconds, a rifle barrel catching sun. Some soldier betting yesterday's safe spot would stay safe today. One shot, move immediately, never shoot from the same hole. Twice in a day, her count climbed. But here's what the propaganda reels skip. She caught shrapnel multiple times, metal fragments, ricochets, near misses that left her ears screaming for days. And she watched friends die. A spotter dropped by a German sniper who'd been tracking them all week. Another sniper who shifted to fast and walked into machine gun fire. A radio man who stood up at exactly the wrong second. These deaths weren't dramatic. They were random, arbitrary. The friendship nobody talks about. During her American tour, something remarkable took shape. Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady, befriended her. This wasn't some photo-op handshake. Roosevelt invited Pavlichenko to stay at the White House. They talked privately. Roosevelt wrote about her in her newspaper column, My Day, which landed in front of 4 million readers every day. On September 3, 1942, Roosevelt wrote, "She is a determined woman, and I think a very honest one." In 1945, after the guns went silent, American newspaper editors pushed Roosevelt to stop mentioning her Soviet friend. Cold War frost was already settling in. The alliance was cracking. Roosevelt told them to pound sand. Why? Because Roosevelt saw something others missed. Pavlichenko wasn't some exotic curiosity. She was a soldier, wrestling with what she'd seen and done. Away from cameras, Pavlichenko opened up about the weight of all that killing, the nightmares, the faces that wouldn't fade. Roosevelt listened. Years later, they kept writing letters. Roosevelt sent care packages, Pavlichenko sent replies. Soviet authorities quietly smothered this friendship after 1945. It hinted at independent thinking, personal bonds, across ideological fault lines, dangerous territory. In Stalin's USSR, after the war, the silencing. When the war ended in 1945, Pavlichenko wore the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Decorated, famous, she figured she'd go back to her studies, pick up normal life. Instead, she got watched. The NKVD, Soviet secret police, kept thick files on prominent veterans, especially ones who'd rubbed shoulders with the West. Pavlichenko's American tour put a target on her back. Her NKVD file, partially cracked open in 2015, runs 47 pages of surveillance reports. Agents noted she speaks favorably of American material conditions and maintains correspondence with ideologically unreliable foreign nationals. The file got stamped potential risk of ideological contamination. She finished her degree, worked as a researcher, trained new snipers during the early Cold War years, but she got clear instructions. Don't discuss certain things. Not how Soviet command screwed up in 1941. Not the chaos and panic. Not the friends who died because of incompetence instead of German skill. And definitely not her friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt. She followed orders because crossing that line was asking for trouble. The question of PTSD. Modern veterans who read Pavlichenko's post-war interviews pick up on something. She checked every box. FOR PTSD. Couldn't sleep worth a damn. Went emotionally flat. Discussing combat. Dodged detailed questions about specific kills. But in the 1940s and 1950s, Soviet military psychology pretended PTSD didn't exist. Soviet military shrinks in the 1950s labeled PTSD symptoms as sluggish schizophrenia, a diagnosis they weaponized against political dissidents. Veterans learned fast. Hide your symptoms or risk getting shipped to psychiatric prisons that might as well have been gulags. Soldiers were supposed to beam with pride about their service. Mental health struggles got read as weakness or political problems. So Pavlichenko, like thousands of other Soviet veterans, suffered behind closed doors. She drank, not enough to make official records, but people close to her noticed. She flinched at certain sounds, cars backfiring, fireworks popping, construction racket. She never remarried, kept her personal life locked down tight. These details only surfaced through scattered records and people who actually knew her. The official biography pretends none of it happened. What the numbers actually tell us. Let's circle back to that number alone. It's just a stat, but context tells the real story. Average combat lifespan of a Soviet sniper in 1941-42. 6 weeks. Pavlichenko's frontline service from June 1941 to June 1942. 1 full year. German snipers. In her kill count, 36. That last one carries the most weight. Counter-sniper work was the deadliest mission a sniper could draw. German snipers were hunting Soviet snipers just as hard. Taking out 36 enemy snipers meant surviving 36 separate fights, where she was being hunted by someone with equal or better training. The survival math is brutal in its simplicity. You can't afford a single mistake. Your opponent only needs one. She went a year without making a fatal error. That's not luck. The myth vs. the woman. Pop culture has molded Pavlichenko into a symbol. The myth says she was fearless, never hesitated. The reality, she puked after her first kill and battled nightmares for decades. The myth says she fought for gender equality and Soviet ideology. The reality, she fought because her country was being invaded, and she had skills they needed. The myth says the USSR celebrated her after the war. The reality, they monitored her, controlled her, and shut her down from speaking freely. The myth says she was one of a kind. The reality, she was one of 2,000 female Soviet snipers, most of whose names have been swallowed by history. The myth says she wore her service with pride. The reality, in a 1969 interview, when asked what she wanted remembered, she said that I was a history teacher, not that I was good at killing. So why does her story matter? Not because she stood alone, but because she got documented. Her service pulls back the curtain on what happened to thousands of others who didn't. The final years, a quiet disappearance. Lyudmila Pavlichenko died in 1974. She was 58. Heart condition, according to official records. But people who knew her suspected the decades of stress, trauma, and forced silence had ground her down. In 1957, Pavlichenko petitioned to get her complete service records declassified for historical research. She wanted future historians to understand what Soviet snipers actually lived through, not just what propaganda fed them. The petition got rejected. Those records are still partially sealed. Her funeral drew Soviet officials and fellow veterans. Her medals got displayed, speeches got delivered. But the real woman, the one who threw up after her first kill, who bonded with an American First Lady, who carried memories she couldn't talk about, that woman was already gone, erased by propaganda, flattened into a symbol. Conclusion: the story they don't want you to know. Here's what this story actually lays bare. 1. War doesn't forge heroes. It churns out survivors who get labeled heroes later. 2. Propaganda cuts both ways. We remember Pavlichenko, not because she was the best, but because remembering her served a purpose. 3. The 2,000 other female Soviet snipers, whose names got erased, tell a much darker story than the one we celebrate. 4. Trauma doesn't give a damn about ideology. Pavlichenko killed to survive, suffered in silence, and died without ever telling her full story. The real tragedy isn't that she killed 309 men. It's that we know almost nothing about who she actually was. Beyond that number, history didn't preserve Lyudmila Pavlichenko. It preserved an idea of her, and in doing that, it buried the truth. In 1943, Eleanor Roosevelt wrote, "She is the most remarkable woman I have ever met." The NKVD confiscated Roosevelt's letters to Pavlichenko in 1946. They've never seen daylight.